Yes, my name is Gaston Moonen. I work for the European Court of Auditors. I'm a chief editor. And before that, I worked for the Netherlands Court of Audit since end of 1992. And that's actually where the link comes to this conversation, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So, INTOSAI Working Group on Environmental Auditing, how did it all got started? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I started as a young staff member, becoming an assistant to the board, being responsible for international relations. And when I started, the 14th INTOSAI in Washington, D.C. was held in October '92, and I just finished. And in '93, we actually started to pick up the work which came out of that one. And that was substantial for the Netherlands Court of Audit, because one of the members, of the three members of the Netherlands Court of Audit, Maarten Engwerda was his name, is his name, he's still around, fortunately. He actually proposed in Washington that INTOSAI should look into the issue of environmental auditing. And making the proposal made him also vulnerable for getting the work. And this is exactly what happened. Chuck Bauscher, the Comptroller General of the GAO, US GAO, actually welcomed, he embraced the proposal and immediately said, well, can you then take that up, becoming the chair of this working group? And so it happened, so it worked out. And I was intensively working with Maarten from the beginning onwards on this topic to set it up and to actually get the basics of what the roles and responsibilities would be of the working group, what roles and responsibilities could be of SAIs in this area. It was really new. And also to see, okay, what kind of audit activities had already been done. But we had to start from scratch. And just going back a little bit, why Maarten Engwerda proposed this? Because we should see the setting of the time frame, 1992, the Rio conference took place. And this was really relevant also for the Netherlands, because the Netherlands, small country, an enormous population per square kilometer, but also some pollution issues being at the delta in Europe of the Rhine, having an important agricultural export. So there were several issues which called for, hey, what is the issue on environment? Can we continue like this? And we should not forget that the Club of Rome, we saw several instances during the last decade, starting in the 50s, 60s, and then, of course, the Club of Rome in the 70s, highlighting that. And then in '92, you have the Rio summit really calling the alarm there, like, hey, there's really an issue we have to address. So that is a bit the background where he actually said, well, we need to do this. He actually comes from a political background where the environment was a big theme, so perhaps that influenced him too. But he proposed this, then we got the work. And we did not only get the work, but we also got environmental auditing to become the main theme of the next INTOSAI. And that was, of course, a big task. And that actually triggered a lot of cooperation with the Americans, with the US GAO, because the US GAO was the chair of INTOSAI. And the 15th INTOSAI would be in Cairo in '95, and it should become the main theme of that. Theme 1, environmental auditing. Theme 2, the other committees and subgroups reporting back. And so we had several meetings with the Americans. I recall we had a meeting also in Austria with the Secretariat. either it was in 93 or 94, I don't recall. And we had a first working group meeting. The initial meeting, perhaps you could say, was in Washington, D.C. I was not there when that happened. That was just before I started. But in 94, we had the real first serious meeting here in Luxembourg. Because, exceptionally also, the European Court of Auditors had been admitted as a member of this working group while not being officially a member of INTOSAI. So that was a novelty also. And the ECA then also had this protocol interest perhaps to host this meeting, and that was done in 94. And I think that, now I don't know all the details anymore. I was the secretary of the working group and did most of the mailings, the writings, etc. Of course, in collaboration with Maarten Engwerda, and also with the US, it was Don Drag who was very, very much involved. We had members. I think we had like 15, 17, 18 members. Size interested. Brazil was there, Austria, the UK, France was there, but there was also quite a bit of competition from the working group on privatization, which was also set up. And that was, of course, after the breakdown of the wall and the whole changes in Europe. The whole issue of privatization also got a lot of attention, and I think that working group was led by France. So. But we had well, several members, fortunately from different continents. As I said, Brazil, I think also from Asia. We had different inputs actually, because I recall that we had, from instance, either it was Zimbabwe or Zambia, talking about environmental issues, that nature was destroyed by elephants going around villages, and that was an environmental issue for them. And so you see from different environments, different perspectives, you get all these highlights, what it means for them. So that was an issue there. One of the things we did working towards the INTOSAI in Cairo was to issue a survey, a pretty standard procedure perhaps, but that was done. I think already end of 93 or 94, because we wanted to have the results ready, of course, for 95. And I really recall that the Americans were really keen on guiding the process as much as possible, because as chair they wanted to have a successful discussion of this theme. And at the same, Egypt was a member of the meeting too, but they were particularly there also because they were the host, of course, of the theme of the INTOSAI. Then we had the discussions in Cairo, where we also, of course, had a meeting with the members of the working group. And you had three sub-themes there. You had basically the issue of presenting the work of the working group done till then. You had actually a discussion on the roles and responsibilities, and you had a discussion on the methods and techniques for environmental auditing to be used. Now, the work of the working group was, of course, making an inventory what had been done, the survey results, etc. But on the roles and responsibilities, that is, of course, there were very different views on that. And that has to do, of course, with to what extent can SAIs do performance audits or not. The most important angle at that moment for most SAIs was the financial compliance angle. And there we see that the starting point was often liability. Liability of governments for environmental destruction, and what kind of liability issues would come from that. Having, of course, an impact on the financial statements, a possible impact. So, and I was actually responsible during the INTOSAI for the theme to write the final report to be presented at the end of the meeting to the plenary. And I recall one big thing in that report, and I really wanted to have that in. And in hindsight, you might think, well, that's perhaps historical hindsight thinking. But I really recall it was called environmental cost accounting. The issue of environmental cost accounting in the sense that governments had to ask actors, be it private, public, to include in their statements like what the possible costs could be, the impacts on environment, expressed in financial terms. And this led to a lot of discussions because as auditors, do we have the expertise to actually assess that, to actually see if it is it there, and secondly, if it is there, can we actually assess, do we have the expertise to say, well, this will have such a cost or whatever. So the topic then was on environmental destruction. Let's say it's like in mining, but with day mining, what the repair costs would be for the future if a state company did day mining, stuff like that. And that, of course, ties in directly to what we see now with environmental reporting, sometimes greenwashing, also related to the financial aspect. Much less was the issue of performance reporting, in the sense what we see now is like, okay, an air quality program from the government, to what extent has that impact? Perhaps more basic were issues like water pollution, water quality, drink water quality, how that was affected. That was already there too. But I recall this environmental cost accounting and the issue of expertise and how to use external experts to actually give substance to the assessment of size on what actually would be relevant to Parliament to report regarding environmental costs. But for sure it was a very rewarding experience, because setting this up and then seeing that you get so much support from size, and there was this realization like, hey, this is something there to stay. And I think one of the main issues there is, of course, the transboundary character of the issue. That is, it was completely clear to member states, what we also saw with the Rio summit, what we saw with the Paris agreements. This is something which concerns all of us, and therefore it also concerns the supreme audit institutions, and we have to address it. The initial work was done through fax and through mail. And the traditional mail, sending letters. And for instance, these surveys, they were sent out by letters, and it would take weeks sometimes before. Well, mail was pretty fast, perhaps for some reason then. But yeah, it was done on paper, and quick messages were faxed, and a lot of calling. I mean, you don't want to see the telephone bill towards the US and Egypt and some other core members of the working group, just to get things going, because this is typical for a chairman. I experienced it also in the INTOSAI Working Group on disaster-related aid. As a chair, you have to motivate people to abide by the deadlines and call in when they do not, and etc. It's quite a task which is underestimated, that you have to get things moving. And yeah, we did a lot of faxing, I recall, but also a lot of calling. Yeah, and yeah, no FaceTime, nothing like that. And sometimes a meeting, we had a few meetings in person. So we went to Washington, D.C., we went to Vienna, there was a meeting in The Hague, there was a... So in those 3 years, we kept the meetings, I think, relatively business-like and short. And we also tried to combine with the INTOSAI, then we have also a meeting. I think that the idea was to have at least once every other year a meeting. So that was it.
Steve Elstein, you worked at the GAO USA and you were involved in the WGA work from quite the beginning. Is that correct?
So the WGA was authorized in 1992. It had its first meeting in 1994, and I was at the first meeting.
So what did you think when you heard of this initiative for the first time? What did you think? Oh, environmental auditing.
I went to Luxembourg City at the first meeting of the WGEA, 12 countries. My recollection is that Peru did not attend, but so there were 11 countries present, chaired by the Netherlands, and I presented the papers. But in 1994, in the world of environmental protection and what have you, it really was quite a different world. People were aware that the climate was changing. There was, at least in an abstract way, people were aware of global environmental issues. But at that time, there were some SAIs that had established environmental programs. They had environmental ministries. By 1994, we had, in the US, we had our Environmental Protection Agency for about 20 to 25 years. And so some countries had established environmental programs, and very few SAIs at that time had real environmental audit capacities. And so at that time, the two issues were, one, how are the governments dealing with environmental protection? And the focus was very much within the country. It was an intra-national perspective. And the SAIs were kind of stumbling through. Very few had established audit capacities. And ours was sort of developing, but it was fairly established. Other countries that had well-established, SAIs that had well-established audit capacities included like the UK, and I remember the Netherlands being very well established. But otherwise, most of the world was just at a very basic level, you know, how should our governments ensure environmental protection? And they were just establishing environmental ministries. And the SAIs were just sort of open to anything, you know, I mean, the idea of evaluating, do performance audits to evaluate how well our environmental programs were working. You know, that was a fairly new thing back in '94. South Africa was also in attendance, and as I mentioned to you earlier, the delegate came in late for rather extraordinary reasons. But otherwise, it was very much a North American European affair, and that's also a very major difference between what happened, well, what existed in 1994 and what exists today.
Mm.
The first chairs were the Netherlands, and then the Canadians. The Netherlands, Canadians, and then I suppose the Estonians came after that. So, you know, even then the chairs were sort of like, it was an Anglo-European, North American, European affair until later, and then it became quite the worldwide affair. Well, you know, to me, it's just a marker in time. It's, when did this meeting occur? Well, this meeting occurred just after Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa. And the reason why it's imprinted in my mind so much is because the seat next to me was the seat for the South African delegate, and he missed the first day. And I kept looking over at this empty chair, wondering where he was. And then at some point during the second day, his name was Graham Randall, a wonderful person. And he sat down and he looked a little disheveled and disorganized until he got settled in. And I just said to him, so what's up? And he explained that Nelson Mandela had just been elected president, and things were in a bit of flux and disorganization. And
So what kind of topics were there on the table at that time? Well, not necessarily in that meeting, but the first topics that you were discussing there.
Yeah, the topics were, we're basically just comparing notes with where we are in this concept of environmental auditing. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the discussion was very basic. It's how is your country organized to deal with environmental issues? Do you have an environmental ministry? What are its responsibilities? In the US, we had an Environmental Protection Agency, and other environmental responsibilities were assigned to different departments or agencies within our government. And I think that was the same with some other countries, but many countries said we haven't really organized this in any logical way, and it hasn't been a priority, but it is becoming a priority now. So that was the situation in 1994, and many were saying, we want to join, we want help, and we want to compare notes on how best to do this, which I think was the impetus for the WGEA. That was one issue, and then the other issue was, okay, as SAIs, how are we organized to evaluate how well our environmental programs are working? And again, the issue was not, are we meeting treaty obligations? That really hadn't been a priority yet. It was more, how are we organized to evaluate the programs that deal with environmental issues within our countries? And so those were really the two issues. How are our governments doing it, and how are SAIs evaluating it? I think one of the lessons I've learned about organizations like the WGEA is you can't look at it and say, oh yeah, we did that 20 years ago. I mean, if it's still relevant. For one thing, the cast of characters changes, as you pointed out. Some people involved in making key decisions weren't even born when the WGEA was founded.
Then one of the core products of the WGEA is the newsletter Green Lines that we publish twice a year. And is it correct that you are the father of the Green Lines?
I love that phrase. Yes and no. The way the Green Lines newsletter came about, the way you would recognize it, was that there was something, and frankly, I don't even remember if it was called Green Lines, but the Canadians had started sending out a kind of a newsletter, but it was focused very much on, excuse me, very much on sort of WGA news, when the next meeting is, what happened at the last meeting. If as I remember the Green Lines that there was a section on WGEA news, and that essentially was what the Canadians were doing. And then John Reed, who chaired the committee for the Canadians, asked me if I could do something else with that so that it could involve SAIs in the process. Make it more interactive, make them more part of this newsletter. And the feature story, a couple other little elements of window dressing, but basically, the point was to bring other SAIs into the process, and I think it did a pretty decent job of that, because I would always get an enthusiastic response for countries that wanted to submit news briefs. And I think it, with all the different flags and colors, it added a bit of color to the newsletter. But I was very, very much appreciative of the fact that SAIs took it seriously. Some SAIs, some authors would have to get their submission approved all the way up to the top of their organizations. And to me, there was some value in that, because that meant that this was a matter of discussion, and their SAI's involvement in environmental issues was a matter of discussion within their SAIs. And so I looked at that as kind of a process. And countries, I never had a shortage of countries willing to volunteer to submit a more detailed and ambitious feature story. So.
And as you know, Green Lines is still there and doing very well, going strong.
Yes, I read it every now and then.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's wonderful. Then Is it correct that the last meeting you attended was in 2013 in Tallinn?
Yes, I remember that first meeting with 11 SAIs present or in a little meeting room and whatever, and looking out there, you know, I saw countries from all over the world represented in this large meeting room. Instead of a small meeting with a few SAIs, it looked more like a meeting of the General Assembly of the United Nations, and I think that reflects the growing interest over such a long period of time, and the worldwide interest. The Anglo-North American European presence at this meeting was, at this point, it was overshadowed by SAIs from all over the world. So that's certainly one way things have changed. The other way things have changed was the sophistication of SAIs and what they were doing. GAO, the British NAO, we were no longer the countries that were giving our knowledge to the world about how things would be done. We were countries that were absorbing information from other countries as well. I mean, the entire, you know, globally, SAIs were sharing information with each other. I mean, that's one aspect globally, but the other aspect was the growth of regional organizations within the WGEA, and nobody had envisioned that in 1994, that there would be all these regional organizations that would be collaborating on multilateral environmental audits and things like that. That actually, I think the seeds of that change, that important change, were about the year 2000. I think it was at the end of the Dutch chair, and the Dutch chair, her name was Saskia Stuyveling, and it was Saskia's idea that that regions develop their own capacity. And I think, you know, I don't want to speak for Saskia, but I think her vision was that the global organization would eventually disappear and defer to these regional organizations. But at that meeting, I believe it was in South Africa, when she made that proposal, everybody kind of unanimously said, no, we can't, you know, environment is a global issue as well as a regional issue. And so there was support for the idea of establishing regional WGEAs. But there was still support for retaining the global organization. And that was a major juncture in the history of this organization. And I think at that point, that became the beginning of the WGEA that you see today.
Hello, everybody. John Reed. Yeah. So SAI Canada, we had the chair of the working group from 2001 to 2007, and I headed up the secretariat in the office for those 6 years, 2 terms, and had a great team, 5 people, and yeah, had a great rewarding experience running the working group.
So what happened during those years? Can you give an overview of your kind of actions or activities?
Well, you know, I say this kind of humbly, but I think we transformed the working group in those years and into what it kind of is now. I remember in 2000, there was a meeting of the Assembly in Ottawa. That was the last meeting that was chaired by the Netherlands. And there were 24 people there from 12 countries. And in our first Assembly meeting, we had, I think, 140 people from 75 countries. So it really kind of exploded. And we did, I think, 3 things that really kind of made it that way. First of all, we created the steering committee, and I think you still have the steering committee today. So the steering committee could focus on the business, you know, managing the business of the working group. And at the same time, we made assembly meetings like conferences. So we, you know, these became 3- and 4-day conferences, and SAIs were invited to come and present results of their audits. And honestly, the response was overwhelming. We learned so many people had this thirst to share and present their work, and so that was kind of transformative. And then the other thing we did is for every project, and we became pretty productive, in terms of the outputs, the publications that we did. We always had a project lead and a subcommittee. And that really kind of seemed to energize people. So many people got involved. I think I don't know if it's true, but I felt at the end of our term, the working group had become the most productive and the most active committee in the entire INTOSAI family. And so that's what I think we did, but that's for history to judge.
Then, what would you describe, or could you identify some of the kind of most memorable moment, like the WGEA moment?
I did it for 6 years, and I have to say I had hundreds, if not thousands, of great moments, and most of them I think were kind of centered around the people. We just worked with so many good people and committed and clever, bright people. I made a lot of friendships in those years, so that was a big part of it. But I knew you were going to ask this question. I think I'd have to say it was our first assembly meeting in Poland. That's the one that still stands out for me because, as I said, we had 140 people there, 75 countries. The enthusiasm was just amazing, and we had this presentation from somebody on UNEP, from the United Nations Environment Program, and they had just released one of the big Millennium Ecosystem Assessments, and that presentation I think was just a magical moment because it just galvanized this entire room, started to realize that the world is in trouble and that environmental audits are a key way to help deal with that. So I would say that was probably the biggest. I had so many, but that was probably the one that still stands out. Your first is always the one that you remember the most, I guess. It was a lot of fun. As they say, if you're going to save the world, you might as well see it. But it was hard to really convince the rest of the office that this was important work, that countries were relying on us to exercise leadership and that kind of stuff. So we had a lot of internal battles. I don't know if you're facing those too, but I would say it was more challenging internally than externally in a sense. We just had so many people that wanted to contribute that it wasn't hard to motivate people at all. It was just hard to get it all done, get all the work done on time and meet all the deadlines and stuff.
Yeah. So now in 2020 and 21, we had to kind of not cancel all meetings, but turn them into an online format, like as virtual meetings. And were there any similar challenges during your time?
Yeah, well, we had 3 cancellations, like 3 meetings that we had planned and we were ready to go, and then we had to cancel at the last minute. The first one actually was related to, not the pandemic, but SARS. If you remember SARS, we were all scheduled to be in China for the first assembly meeting, and we had to cancel that on 10 days notice. 170 people were scheduled to go to China, and all of a sudden Canadians weren't allowed to travel, and that was a huge blow to us. I remember how depressed we were the night we had to pull the plug on that meeting. And then we had a meeting scheduled to be in Fiji, and about 3 weeks before that, there was a military coup with the government, so we knew we couldn't go there. And then we were also scheduled to be in Indonesia, and there was an earthquake that kind of flattened half of the country, and we just felt it wasn't the right thing to do to go into a country that was, suffering that kind of way. So, yeah, we had our share of kind of cancellations and challenges, but for the most part, things ran smoothly, and we were always able to find an alternative on short notice, and that was, I think, a testament to how many countries were committed. We'd make a phone call and say, we're in trouble, can you host? And within 24 hours, somebody would come back and say, yeah, we can do it. And so it was gratifying. We were always able to find a solution, thanks to so many countries and people that believed in what we were doing. So I empathize with you. It's not easy, and it's face-to-face is better. Let's face it. Virtual is almost as good, but it's not quite as good as being able to talk to people face-to-face and all the side discussions that happen. That's sometimes where the real work takes place. It's not in the meetings themselves. It's in coffee breaks and dinners and excursions and that kind of thing. I think for many years in the beginning, I think the working group was kind of a small club of large SAIs, many of them from Western countries. And I think, at the end of it, we really reached out to all continents, and we were getting participation from all over the place. So you kind of realize that when people have a chance to be involved in any degree, they'll go for it, and that's their motivation. You don't need to motivate them when you give them a chance to contribute. And I think that was the biggest lesson that I learned. That's the big lesson for me: the power of inclusion, and once people are self-motivated, then the rest of it's pretty easy.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, what would you like to say to the working group on its 30th anniversary?
It's amazing, isn't it? Such a great legacy. I would say don't stop. I mean, just keep doing the good work you're doing. The world's in trouble. It's 50 days since Earth Day, and the Earth is still under enormous pressure, environmental pressure, not just climate and biodiversity and ocean pollution. I mean, it's just so many things that are still going on, and honestly, it's up to auditors to push our governments. I mean, it's the most powerful force there is, and I would just say to everybody, just keep doing it, don't give up, and keep hammering away at your governments, and because that's what causes change ultimately. And of course, I want to wish you, Vivi, and SAI Finland great success in managing the future of the working group, and I know it's in good hands. So.
My dear colleagues, I would like to congratulate us all on the 30th anniversary of the INTOSAI Working Group on Environmental Auditing. These 3 decades have turned our working group into an excellent network of professionals. By now, it is also a global circle of friends. I am proud that the National Audit Office of Estonia has been closely involved in this journey. For 6 years, from 2007 to 2013, our office had the privilege of chairing the working group on environmental auditing. We did our best in leading the group and creating value for all the members. But I think the leadership period was a valuable experience for our office and many of our people. Year by year, environmental concerns are becoming more important among public sector priorities. The role of the supreme audit institutions is to point out the bottlenecks and notice the unused potential in environmental governance practices. It is our task to communicate our conclusions without ideology in a neutral, research-based manner to maintain our credibility. Every society has many complex economic, social, security, and environmental calculations. Finding the right balance between them is the crucial question. I use this occasion to especially thank the National Audit Office of Finland for their outstanding work in chairing the working group during these turbulent times that we have had in the world. Vivi and her team hold very high standards to the quality of their work. This working group is one of the most active ones in INTOSAI. With the guidance of Vivi, I wish you all have a fruitful meeting and keep up the good work in environmental auditing. Once again, congratulations.
I joined the Estonian WGEA Secretariat back in 2010 when Estonia was preparing already for a second chairmanship and work plan period. And I remember how increasingly vibrant and active the group was back then. The membership was growing, the number of projects and initiatives was increasing, and there was a general kind of sense of good, fruitful cooperation and strive towards understanding even better what the environmental field through the lens of public sector audit means. I think one of the landmark achievements during our chairmanship was the SAI of India's global training facility, which started as India's vision to erect a training center on the plain fields near Jaipur, and we really saw it being built, being launched, and many WGEA experienced members contributed to the development of the first training course on environmental auditing, which still runs today. I think another highlight that comes to mind is a compilation of messages, observations, and recommendations to Rio Plus 20 conference, which were put together again by inputs, by analyzing inputs from different SAI members. Brazil and Canada did a great job in this project. As a team, we experienced a lot and we grew a lot, and working for the Secretariat meant that you had to try to be an expert in many different fields, organizing meetings, understanding international relations and diplomacy, different cultural aspects, and also environmental topics, at least gaining a general sense about them, as was the case for me. Luckily, I had really very good colleagues, Denise, Tuuli, Margit, and Kaire, from whom I learned a lot. And we had some really funny instances. For example, I remember when we were traveling to Buenos Aires, and what we did at the time when we went to the meetings, we took the flags with us. To all the meetings, we took the flags. But if you had an assembly with 50-something different SAIs attending, and a suitcase full of metal rods, the flags were on metal rods, then, well, you have to do some explaining at the airport, because through the machines, it looks like you may be a potential harmful person. And I also remember that we grew ever closer through experiences such as, amidst really hectic preparations, our Auditor General informed us that he had by mistake taken an identical looking suitcase and he has now no idea how to get his right one. Or when our Secretary General had to really unexpectedly leave earlier and one of the meeting days had to be cut, it had to be shortened by half. Or we had just concluded a successful assembly, and then a day later, one of the delegates who sadly had travel issues writes an email that she has now arrived. So through these, as a hindsight, really funny occasions, you learn to adapt, you learn to get support and help from your colleagues, and just you have some funny stories to tell afterwards. WGEA is now 30, and 30s are said to be one of the happiest times in a person's life. At least old people sometimes claim so. I'm sure the 30s will be successful for the WGEA as well.
I remember when we hosted our first WGEA meeting in Bali back in 2009. I think that was the first time when I was involved with WGEA. Then in 2014, the chairmanship was handed over to us, and I was involved in the secretariat with Edward, Ami, and Dominica until 2019. What's the most memorable moment? I would say interactions among members during meetings would be most memorable. It's great fun to see people sign up on the flip charts for projects they would like to take up. Discussions taking place during meetings. I think WGEA is all about getting people together and working together. But that was all when meetings were all physical, right? For online meetings, not so memorable. There was one time when we halted the traffic in front of the Asia Africa building in Bandung just because we wanted to take a picture of all the delegates standing in front of the building. So we put the traffic to a complete stop for a few minutes just to take that picture. And so it was quite historical though. There were so many challenges in chairing and hosting meetings. Like in 2018, we had to relocate our meeting venue from Yogyakarta to Bandung because a volcanic eruption took place just a few weeks before the meeting started. And so we had to quickly find an alternative venue and had to deal with so many changes during such a short period of time. But we managed. Happy birthday, WGEA. I wish you all the best for the future, and may the good fortune continue.